G'day, welcome to Market Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video on, well, as the title suggests, on something that is very commonly got wrong from the experts of all sorts of forms, be them in books or on YouTube, be them the gun shop guys and the guys who are setting up guns for you, and even some guys at the range, that they still get wrong. Now, that says that I know what's right, and listen, I suppose what I'm really putting forward is what I've seen, my experience, a little bit from coming outside of the box in the way of being more a engineer slash mechanic. I'm not a qualified engineer, but I am someone who's always thought through that process, and I've looked at coming to firearms with that process. But if you look closely in firearms, you'll see that what I'm talking about is very logical anyway. It's just that it runs against listen, what are we talking about? We're talking about scope height. I've done videos on it before, and listen, I'm in no doubt preaching in some cases to the choir, because there's a lot of people who listen to my channel, follow my stuff, that understand what my thoughts are on that and have come to the same conclusion, as a lot of experts already, other experts already have as well. And that is basically the logic of having your scope low to the barrel is a good thing. Apart from aesthetics, or maybe fitting into a rifle case or a rifle bag, but then there is some good things. I understand and appreciate that if you like the look of a scope being down on a rifle, it makes it look like a nicer rifle to you, and that's what's most important, then okay, then I agree with you. A low scope's a good scope height. If it's about fitting in the gun bag, and that's the most important thing to you, getting it into the gun bag, that's what matters most, then okay, then I agree with you. A low scope's a good scope. If it's about accuracy and consistency and shooting well and comfort and all the other things that a rifle's about, actually getting that projectile most accurately to target, then let's not quote numbers, but in the majority of cases, a higher scope, to a degree at least, is the smart place and the better place for it. And then I do not agree that a low scope's a good scope. In a lot of places, I see people doing all sorts of things, but largely the getting the scope close to the barrel, not touching the barrel, getting the bell of the scope close to the barrel being a good thing, under the guise that it's more accurate. That's more accurate. The closer you can get your scope to the bore of your barrel, the center line of your barrel, then the more accurate it's going to be. And that's logical, isn't it? Because then the two things are very close together, and they're going to get to the same place at this together. So it's more accurate is the logic. I suppose that's where the logic comes from. It's actually quite incorrect in any mathematical sense. You have light that travels as a laser beam dead straight. You have bullets that travel suffering the effects of wind and gravity, but basically gravity. So they have come a parabolic, or as I pointed out to me, half a parabolic curve where they keep on going lower and lower, so because they're being pushed down. So they're never going to line up apart from, well, actually never are they going to line up together apart from a little point where that curve of that half a parabolic curve line is close to the same angle as the scope coming down to it. So the end of the day, and there's tests. I'm not a big fan of internet tests. They tend to be more about trying to prove an instant little point, and testing is far more complicated than that. But certainly in even tests, but in experience, anyone who's done it, you can raise your scope up to probably as high as 4 inches, and you won't find a lot of difference in anything about accuracy, unless of course you shoot a bit gangster. You like shooting your rifle on the side. Well, it's probably slightly more accurate if you've got a close scope to the bore or slightly less inaccurate than if you got the scope close to the bore versus a high and a long way from the bore. But they're all inaccurate. It's a terrible way to shoot a rifle. You should always be shooting a rifle with it straight up and down. And at that stage, then scope height doesn't matter that too much. Well, I should say being close doesn't actually help you. What does matter, and here's the detail that is very, very important about understanding about where a scope should be. To start off with, the reason that scopes were sat low at the beginning, and that is because at the beginning, scopes were new, and rifles were set up as this is not classic, but I suppose it's a little bit classic, but it's a little bit the design of an old style stock. This is a thumb hole, this is a Boyd stock, is what it is, laminated stock. People ask, it's pretty, it looks nice. Yes, okay. I don't have a lot of wood stock, so that's why it's here. This is just a little 22 that's done 20,000 rounds. It's a little CZ 452, but it's a sort of a good example of what I want to talk about here. Stocks were set up initially where for two things were going on. You're using iron sights on the top of the barrel, so you're trying to line up along the top of the barrel. So that meant to get on the top of the barrel, you needed to be able to get your face right down on them. This is made for a scope, so they didn't have quite as much of this, so that the butt stock is lower, but it means that you can then get down where you can sight up along the barrel. That's what was going on to start off with. So those same rifles, when you put a scope on them, then you'd want to be able, you're only moving a little tiny bit up, and you get to this sort of thing where you've got a cheek riser on it, but it's all in the same structure to where they were designed to start off with, to sight along the top of the barrel, and then you're trying to use that same setup with a rifle scope on top there. So you want it nice and low so you can get it to where your cheek weld is in the right place, all that sort of stuff works properly. At the end of the day, the reason they did that was they were using a bit of wood for a stock. Not a laminated one like this, just one bit of wood. And the structure of a bit of wood, as you'll see in the early stuff, is actually getting to come down through this point here. If you have normal grain structure and you end up where you've just short graining it, so you just end up going across your grain, then that's most likely to break. If you can keep the grain all going through the line of your stock, then it's a lot stronger because you're using it in the fashion it should be, where you're using the grain structure to make the thing stronger. So that's where the initial stuff came from. Basically, they were building things and they didn't fully understand, as much as getting a projectile to scoot down a barrel very accurately was pretty much something that they came onto very, very early and worked out very, very well. And that's been around for, I've forgotten how many hundreds of years, but for a long time that's been going very well. The structure of working in what they were shooting it in was done inside wood, which is what they were using. So that meant that making it, the more powerful it got, the more recoil it was, the more likely it was to break. So the grain structure of the wood became very, very important. And that's where our evolution of even into our composite stocks and things with fiberglass and even our chassis came to this same sort of basic structure. Angles and things like that were all designed about that. But you'll notice also in other places when we started to understand, and I suppose what I should say to go forward with that, I'll sit this down rather than holding it up like that. What happened as we started to understand about being more accurate, from the cowboy era of being able to shoot bang, 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 where you're shooting like you're throwing a rock, to where it came into where you're sighting and then you're using a rifle and sighting it properly, and that, whether that was from offhand to then going for more accuracy and looking to go with resting it or to going to prone and all the rest of it. So all of a sudden what I suppose it takes to hit something is different than what it takes to be very accurate. So that's a little hard to describe and explain in higher detail, but what I wanted to say is, or without going into higher detail, what I want to say is accuracy became, and as anyone who knows, who's pursued accuracy, comes about consistency. And then consistency comes about a couple of things. Aiming the rifle, aiming the firearm at target and squeezing the trigger properly and making sure your body does all the right things so that you don't flinch and do things weird is one part of it. It's actually only a small part of real accuracy. Real accuracy actually has to do as much or more to do with what happens after that trigger breaks. Recoil, what happens after recoil? And then that classic structure of a rifle is not a good design at all. Now, not to say it can't be very accurate and people aren't very accurate with it. Yes, it is able to be done, and in whether it's the specifics of that particular setup or that particular rifle or barrel or bullet or projectile or shooter or whatever it is, yes, it can be done. but in the way of what is real consistency, which means it can deal with more things, and it can be for the less shooter ability needed to have this same accuracy, or in the path I'm going down there, is the actual engineering of the firearm needs to be redesigned. What I'm actually talking about, if you notice here, when I go down to shooting down this, when I go down to shooting down like lower than this scope is pretty low. This is just a little 22. It's higher than what you'll see a lot of them. Fair bit of bell clearance here, but it is the lowest I run them. This is running at about 2 1/4 inches of scope height, which means it's on about, it's a 1 1/8 set of rings, 1 1/8 set of rings. So it's pretty tall for what it is. It's small, it's a low scope height compared to what I would be shooting if this rifle, if I was setting up in a high power or a target rifle. But let's just go with this one here. We'll go down to low where they normally would be. When I do this, so then I'm lined up about along just above the barrel. I want you to pay attention of how that's actually sitting on my shoulder. Where my shoulder fulcrum point is actually about there. So that means when it's got recoil, what's going to happen? You get a line of force that's coming here, you're pushing here, it's going to go like this. Boom, like a lot of hunting rifles do. They boom, they go up here. Now I talk a lot about raising butt pads to get that line of push up behind here, so that when it goes boom, like this. Maybe a little tiny bit of a movement, but basically it's just directly pushed on the top there rather than pushed down the bottom here. So that push is important, but this raising your butt pad doesn't help one little tiny bit if you're sighting here, because it's just you're going to have a high butt pad. The high butt pad very much matters, but it matters to where you're trying to put your face to your rifle. So you go to, the moment I raise this to where it would be for something with a lot of power, let's say this is in a 375 H&H, and I shot it like this, you'll still see that where if I'm sighted to here, you'll see where my shoulder, where my push point is about here. It's still going to do a fair bit of this raising. Now, I don't have the butt pad in the right position, but if I did raise my butt pad up to where it should be for that straight line push, then you'll find what that's actually going to look like is this. To get that up to where it should be on my shoulder point there, I'm going to need a scope that's about another inch higher. And that's what I'm really saying. If you get away from the fact we're not using a piece of wood and we can design a rifle to where the butt pad can be where it needs to be. Cheek weld's another conversation I'll touch back on in a minute, but when we're going to get our eye position to where it's in the right place, so our shoulder's in the right place, and that's the difference between here and here. It's that difference there. There is a difference of that point there, which is what we're talking about. Now that'll be different on different humans. It's certainly different between me and Sam. 6'4" and 5'1.5". There's a difference there, but that is still generally, you can be a little bit higher. We're all a little flexible on exactly where our head position is. The line of push position isn't flexible if you want it to straight recoil. So this even matters in places where safari rifles, yes, there's people building safari rifles that end up, rather than the big boom between shots, which is a normal setup with the normal drop down buttstock, which is all set up, and they've got with a scope or iron sights, whatever it was, and they get this big boom, they lower it down here. I'm seeing that where they're starting, the stocks is changing, so you get this straight push. The logic there is not just as much as letting the rifle goes up relieves you from a little bit of the recoil. The other side of things is if you're in a fast follow-up and your rifle's up here where you got to get it back down, it's a lot harder to do than if you've just gone boom and you're on it to where you can follow up quickly. But the whole detail of getting not just the butt pad in the right place, but getting your shoulder in the right place is getting the scope in the right place. So that's a detail which is most noted in the way of the simple thing, as it isn't just a new idea. We'll go back to the M16 things and look at where those iron sights are. That's for a very simple reason. On particularly fully automatic fire, if you've got them down looking over the barrel, it just goes up. You lower the thing down as it is, the butt pad's in the right place, the sight's in the right place, the head's in the right place, it stays pointing in the right direction. That's the simple logic of engineering. And it comes down to where I started. If you like the look of it and that's the most important thing for your rifle, then lower it down and have it like that, so have it down there. It's still shootable, it's still doable. We've been doing it for literally, well, over 100 years of shooting like that. People have been pulling that off. But if accuracy is more important, or like I said, if fitting the gun case is the most important thing, and fitting the gun safe is the most important thing, that's all it really does, then I fully understand it. But the moment accuracy is brought into it, accuracy, consistency, the way of making the engineering work properly, then a low scope, that pretty rifle with a really low scope, is not really set up for accuracy. And I'm not saying you're not accurate with it, and I'm not saying it's not the best one that you've got and all that sort of stuff. What I am saying is in the engineering of it, getting this up, and getting this up really, really matters in the way of accuracy. Cheek weld, I said I'd get back to that. The whole thing of cheek weld, listen, there's a couple of things involved. With cheek weld, the logic of it's a little bit like bow shooting. It's a little bit, you get the string to your face and hold exactly the same position. Yes, it is relevant, and particularly when body form is relevant, but with a good scope and parallax scope and that sort of stuff, then your aim is going to be the same. Your body form is still relevant, but whether it's chin weld or cheek weld or teeth weld, jawbone weld, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one it is. It doesn't matter where your face is. In some cases, to get cheek weld on some rifles, you really have to screw your face over to get your eye down on it. That's not anywhere near as good as, even though this might seem vague to a lot of people, it's just touching on my chin. If that's consistent, that works just as well. Sorry about that. Obviously all that stuff is a little bit personal, but all this stuff can be shot super accurately, super consistently with the good equipment, but by setting things up properly. Getting it to where that line of push matters for consistency. It really does, but it only works if you've got your eye in the right place so your body can pull that off properly. Anyway, I think that's enough going there. Like I said, it always annoys me when I see people shooting, particularly on benches, and holding the rifle down on the front of the scope here so that they can make sure it goes back straight. You know, what that's telling me instantly, the moment you're doing this, is your rifle isn't performing like you want it to. You should be able to do it in whatever form with whatever grip you want, but just a little bit into you, or whatever it is, a little bit of pressure into you. You should be able to do it comfortably without controlling where it's going. The reason they're doing that is because of exactly this, that line of push, up it goes, and they're trying to control more power by having a bit of pressure here to make sure it sits a bit flatter, to help them see the follow through, but also to settle the rifle down a little bit. I would redesign the rifle a little bit. Anyway guys, hope to make some sense. Thanks for checking in. We'll catch you next time.